I also hope that you are enjoying this new technology of webinar. So today I'll be delivering a topic on non-destructive testing of concrete structures. As already introduced by Professor English, sir, I am practicing in this field for now more than 30 years. And we have been doing various jobs under the name of Construction Diagnostic Center, right from structural audit, non-destructive testing, and repair and rehabilitation. So basic question that why we require non-destructive test. Most of the time, the issue is a lower cube strength. That is, suppose you have casted the concrete for say M30, and after testing cube, then you have found out that the strength is lower, maybe say 20 or 25. Then this is a typical issue that you require to know that what is the strength of my site concrete. Because my cube strength has failed, then you don't have any other option or any specific direct destructive test which you can perform on site. But then the option left only is you can go with non-destructive test. Then many a times there are doubts about workmanship involved in batching, mixing, placing, compaction, or curing of concrete. Suppose by chance your way batcher, there is a issue that was with say calibration of your way batcher, and you find that the mix proportion is not going correct. Then what is to be done? Sometimes it happens that you have not compacted it properly, or you are not able to place the concrete correctly. Or many times people report us that the curing has not been done properly at site. So these are the situations where you don't have any option but to go for non-destructive test. Then sometimes there could be some requirements to determine the strength of concrete or quality of concrete, especially when the structure is overloaded or it is undergoing some fatigue load, or there is a chemical reaction, or there is a fire, or there is some explosion, or even in general there is a weathering and aging effect. So there could be n number of situations wherein you would like to know that what is the present capacity of that particular structure. In today's lecture, I am going to cover most of the tests mainly related to concrete or RCC structures. I'll be touching all the tests because time is very short. We have to cover because NDT is a very huge topic, and there are almost more than around 30 to 40 methods which are practiced in NDT. So it's very difficult to complete all these tests in a short time of around say 1.5 hours. So today I'll be taking a overview of non-destructive test. So in addition to above, there could be some other requirement also that you want to ascertain the in situ strength of concrete, whether it is accepted for the design loading system or the actual loading system, or maybe proposed or projected loading system for the new use. Many times a question is asked that what is the reliability of NDT? Reliability or accuracy of NDT, if you say, then it could be somewhere between say plus or minus 10 to 25%. When we see this figure of 2-digit 10 to 25%, then most of the time people start asking us that this reliability seems to be on quite low side. That means for M25 concrete, you may call that concrete as even M20, or you may call that concrete as M30 when we conduct non-destructive tests, because accuracy is plus minus 10 to 25%. But here we should remember that we are dealing with a very complex and heterogeneous material, which is a concrete. If you compare NDT with other engineering branches like mechanical engineering or metallurgy engineering, where a lot of NDT is being conducted, and in these particular engineering branches or say systems, the accuracy of NDT is compared to civil, it's very much fine-tuned. It is plus minus around 3 to 5% plus minus. So if we compare the accuracy with mechanical or say metallurgical engineering, then as I said, then there could be always a comparison that civil entity is not that reliable. But try to understand, we are dealing with a very complex material. All other engineering branches, they deal with the homogeneous materials like metals, where the property of the material an inch apart is same, even a meter apart, the property is almost same, and they are homogeneous material. But when we talk of concrete, try to understand that concrete is a heterogeneous material. The property of concrete varies even an inch apart. So it's not going to be remain same. And that's why you cannot expect accuracy in 1 digit or single number. It cannot be less than say 10%. It will be somewhere between 10 to 25%. Now, when we talk of say 10 to 25%, then side by side, we should also know, because this we are going to compare with our standard reference cube strength. You check any of the tender documents related to construction works, the acceptance criteria given in all these tenders for concrete is 28 days cube strength of the concrete. So that is the acceptance criteria. And when we talk of say M20 grade of concrete, so that 20 figure stands for 28 days characteristic strength of concrete. So all the time we are interested in comparing the characteristic strength of concrete. And this characteristic strength of concrete is of cube. And what we are measuring with an NDT, that is not the strength of cube, but that is the strength of in situ concrete. Or not only the strength, but we are measuring all the parameters of in situ concrete. So we must understand that there is going to be some variation, and the accuracy and reliability, this will basically depend on various factors. First important is proper selection of ND test, proper surface preparation for every test. You should be very careful while selecting all these parameters. If you go somewhere wrong in any of these parameters, or if you are not sure, or if you are wrongly selected any of these parameters, then the reliability of ND results, it will start dropping down. So that's why you should select an appropriate test for appropriate situation and appropriate location. Then surface preparation is very, very important for each and every ND test. To just few example, suppose you are going to conduct a rebound hammer test and an ultrasonic test, then removal of plaster is very much essential. Even for that matter, if you are going to conduct a half cell potential or a resistivity meter or a reinforcement detection also, it is recommended to remove the plaster. For core testing and rebar locator, it may not be necessary to remove the surface plaster, because you can directly detect sometimes reinforcement over plaster also. But if the thickness of plaster is say very thick, say more than 2 inches or 50 mm, more than 50 mm, then in such case, the instrument may have limitation. And in such case, you will have to remove the plaster even for reinforcement detection also. But if you are going to conduct the test on, as I said, rebound hammer, ultrasonic, half cell potentiometer, and resistimeter, you have to remove the plaster on the surface concrete. Then not only removal of plaster, the concrete also needs to be very smooth and flat. So for that, you may have to do some grinding work. Even if we think of a test like pile integrity test, For that test also, it is very much essential to make the top surface of that pile sufficiently smooth. So for almost every test, you require a surface preparation. Then it's very important that you should combine various non-destructive tests. As I'm saying that NDT, we are measuring some indirect parameter. Like say cube testing, you're directly going to crush the cube under compression testing machine. But in NDT, nowhere we are going to crush the site concrete at site. So we are measuring some different parameter. And that parameter, indirectly, we are trying to correlate or say combine with the compressive strength. So when we do this interpretation of this ND test, it is always recommended that you should combine at least 2, but preferably 3 to 4 ND tests to arrive at a sound conclusion. I will show you what combinations we can have for various non-destructive tests. Then it is equally important that how many samples or extent of testing you are carrying out. To give an example, suppose you have a building which is quite large building. Say you have a building of about say 1 lakh square feet area, and wherein you have more than say 1,000 columns in that building. And suppose you test only say 5 or 10 columns, then compared to your structure size, the sampling or extent of testing is too small. So that's why normally it is recommended to test about say 10 to 20 or 25% of the members. Again, the issue is on one member. Suppose you have selected one column, at how many locations we should test or we should carry out this ND test. So for every test, the extent of testing will differ. Maybe for rebound hammer and ultrasonic testing can be performed at every say 1 to 1.5 meter center to center. If it is half cell potential test or resistivity test, maybe you can conduct the testing at a frequency of or at a range of around say 0.5 meter to 1 meter center to center. So sampling and extent of testing, that is also very important. Many of the times in India, unfortunately, it so happens that because of the consideration of cost, people try to do a very limited testing. And if you do a very limited testing, wherein your sampling size is insufficient and you're not able to cover all the areas or all the regions of that particular member, or you're not able to cover the particular issue in that particular structure or member, then again, the reliability will drastically come down. Then most important is correlation of non-destructive test with standard site samples. Because ultimately we are going to, if we are talking of a compressive strength of concrete, then ultimately with NDT we are trying to predict the in situ strength of that concrete. So we must have some correlation with that site concrete. And for that, either you can extract the core sample, which is the most recommended method. So it is always recommended that whenever you want to know the concrete strength or in situ strength of concrete, it is recommended that along with rebound hammer or ultrasonic or other methods, you must extract few samples of core concrete. So that is very much essential. In exceptional cases, suppose core extraction is not possible, and suppose if that site is new, then maybe you can correlate these test results with the standard site cube results. So before crushing the cube, you can carry out the ND test on that cube sample and then crush that cube. So you can establish a correlation between that particular test value. Suppose it is a rebound test method, then rebound number. If it is ultrasonic, then the velocity of that cube versus the actual crushing strength of cube. So it's very important that you correlate the non-destructive test with your actual site concrete. Then cognizance of various factors and site conditions. Almost each and every test, it will have some limitations, and there will be some factors which will affect the overall reliability or performance of that test. So you must be aware that what are those factors, how they affect that particular test, and to minimize the say variation in prediction, how to correct these uh, factors. So for that, you have to pick up a lot of information from site, which may include temperature of the concrete, maybe temperature of atmosphere, humidity, maybe specifically humidity of that particular concrete, that whether concrete is dry or it's partly wet or it's fully saturated concrete. So like that, you have to collect a lot of information. Sometimes even the ambience also will play a major role. Whether your structure is located in say coastal area, if it is in coastal area, then the humidity is going to be very much higher. Then because it is located in coastal area near to seashore, so there may be some salinity in the air also. So that also is likely to affect your results of uh, test or concrete. So it is very much important that you collect all these information from site. And there are n number of again factors, whether the concrete is carbonated or not, or what is the depth of that particular concrete, what is the cement content, what is the water cement ratio being used, what type of aggregate is being used, whether it is a basalt or it is a granite or it is a sandstone or it is a hematite. So what kind of aggregate is being used? Because each and every this parameter is going to make a difference in your results and reliability. So you must pick up all these data. Then the laboratory or that whatever organization who is going to perform that ND test, that must be very sound, and they should have developed various charts for correlation of these particular values with the required parameter. Suppose you want to test, suppose you want to know the strength of concrete, in situ strength of concrete by rebound hammer and ultrasonic. Then the laboratory or that particular institute firm which is going to conduct non-destructive tests must have developed several correlation charts and factors for converting that rebound number or that ultrasonic value to equivalent of uh, compressive in situ compressive strength. And again, that laboratory or that firm must have developed sufficient correction factors which are required maybe for say moisture or age or type of cement or type of aggregate or humidity or temperature of that particular concrete or carbonation. So there could be a number of reasons. So for that, you must have a research done and you must have the appropriate correction factors. And then you applying, after applying all these correction factors and correlation chart, then you try to predict a compressive strength based on these particular site information. So it is very important that site conditions, accuracy, reliability of available correlation, what you have. So on all these factors, your accuracy and reliability will depend. And that's why I'm saying that the NDT results can have accuracy of plus minus at 10 to 15%. It depends on how accurately you have conducted the test. So as I said that most of your contract or tender conditions, they will talk of only the cube strength as the acceptance criteria for concrete. And as that is the only acceptance criteria given in almost all the tenders and documents, so we try to believe and we overemphasize this cube strength. But the $1 million question is, does a cube strength truly represents the in situ strength of concrete. Because suppose you have casted a cube and you have tested that cube. So based on that, we say that suppose for M20 concrete, we have crushed the cubes and the cube average strength is say 24. Then we try to say that my strength of site concrete is 24. It is not correct. That is the strength of that particular cube, and that is not the strength of in situ concrete. So there are n number of parameters or other factors which affect the cube strength. So just I will go through these parameters. Again, I know that time is very short, so simply I will list out what are the parameters on which the cube strength is affected. Age, that is for blended concrete cement. Blended means if it has been fly ash or GGBS has been used in your concrete, then that is a blended cement concrete. Then normally all these blended material, they will have a slower strength development. Size of cube, if the cube, normally what we use is 150 by 150 by 150 cube. If the size is high, then the strength is on lower side, and vice versa. That suppose the cube strength is, cube size is small, then you will have a higher strength. Then shape, normally we follow the Britishers, that is all the codes are based on British codes, most of the codes. And that's why we are following the cube. But in US, they measure the cylindrical strength. So even the strength of cube and cylinder is not same. Cube strength is almost 1.25 times the cylindrical strength. So that's why shape also affects. Then mold material, texture of mold, whether, because when you cast the cube, they are with cast iron, but at site, we don't have any cast iron shuttering material. At site, we have mild steel, timber, plywood, or PVC. So that also will have effect. Compaction, how you are going to compact, how many layers, number of blows, diameter of compaction rod, curing temperature, very important. And as you all students, you must know these some intricacies, because I know that uh, when you young engineers, you go to the site, most of the time it has been seen that many of the students, they don't know these intricacies, that how a cube should be correctly tested. And if you test a cube in wrong way, then your entire interpretation is going to be wrong. Curing temperature of that particular curing pond or tank, it should be 27 degree plus or minus 2. If the temperature is higher, then you get higher strength. Vice versa, if the temperature is lower, the strength will be on lower side. Curing period, normally cube we cure for 28 days, but for site concrete, we never cure site concrete for 28 days, but we cure only for 10 days. Remember, these 10 days, this is for ordinary Portland concrete. And if you are using a fly ash or GGBS based cement or concrete, then the curing period shall be minimum of 15 days. And presently in India, 85% of the cement in India is blended cement. That is, it is either blended with fly ash or GGBS. So it's very important that your site concrete should be cured for minimum 15 days and not 10 days. Then moisture condition at the time of testing of that particular cube, it should be SSD, that is saturated surface dry condition. That is, the cube should be perfectly wet. If it is air dried, then you will have a strength more than 20 to 25%. Then type of compression testing machine, direction of casting and direction of testing. And most important, again, every student or every site engineer must know that the rate of loading at which the cube is to be crushed. IS 516 specifically gives a value of 140 kg per centimeter square per minute. That is, if you assume a size of 150 by 150 by 150 cube, then approximately it is 315 kilonewton per minute. With that speed, we should crush a cube. And my personal experience for last 33 years, that in India, almost 99% cases, people don't follow this rate of loading. 99% cases I am saying. And this includes all site laboratories, even many of the engineering colleges or polytechnics or IITs, they don't have this rate of loading control system. And even they don't know what the rate of loading it should be. And if you crush with a very high speed, which is a normal case, almost in India, we are checked with number of thousands of sites, and we have found that the rate of loading with which the actual cubes are crushed, that is almost around 2 to 5 times the required loading time. Even many sites we have seen, more than around 50% cases, the rate of loading is 5 to 10 times. And if you have such a high rate of loading, then your cubes will have very high false strength. Actual strength will be lower, but because of higher rate of loading, the strength reflected in cube will be much higher. So these are various factors on which the cube strength is dependent. And now if you compare the plus minus or errors in all these points what I listed, if you do it wrongly, then the cube strength may be wrong by around say 20 to 50, 60% plus minus. So if that is going to be error in your cube concrete, then why we say that NDT reliability of 10 to 25% is on low side. Compared to cube, then NDT will be much reliable because it is actually testing the in situ concrete. And this cube is not testing in situ concrete, and that's why cube will not truly represent the in situ strength of concrete. Now we will see some of the non-destructive tests. Just wait for a second. Yeah, sorry. So now we will see what ND tests which are used world over. I have categorized them based on the principle or method which is used for these ND tests. So first method is a surface hardness, where basically we are measuring the surface hardness of concrete, and that we are trying to correlate with the compressive strength. So under that we have rebound hammer test, then penetration test. Penetration test, rebound hammer, many times people know with its name as Schmidt hammer test. But Schmidt is a person who invented that test, so that's why it's commonly known as Schmidt hammer, but the correct technical word is rebound hammer. Similarly, there is one test which is known as penetration test. Again, the person who invented, he was a Windsor, that's why it's very popularly called as a Windsor probe test also. Then we have second group, that is based on the dynamic or vibration principles. Under this, we have different methods like resonant frequency. This is only performed in laboratory. This cannot be performed at site. Then ultrasonic pulse velocity, acoustic emission, impact echo, transient dynamic, sonic or pulse echo, or impulse response, or vibration measurements. So if you see all these tests, they are talking of some dynamic property, or they are based on some vibration or impacts. So that's why we can classify all these tests under dynamic or vibration methods. Then we can have other category under magnetic methods. Under magnetic method, we have basically reinforcement detectors and cover meters. All these tests, I'm going to show you the photographs also, and I'm going to brief you about some of these tests in detail also. Then another group is the ND test based on electrical methods. Under that, we have dielectric measurement. This is used mainly for measurement of moisture. Then electrical resistivity, half cell potential test, or polarization technique. These three tests, electrical resistivity, half cell, and polarization, normally they are used for identifying or assessing the probability of corrosion. Then we have very one interesting group, that is electromagnetic method. Under this, we have a test method which is called as radar, or this is also known as GPR, that is ground penetrating radar. Then we have some other technique under which we have radioactive or infrared or thermal methods. Under this, we have X-ray radiography, gamma ray radiography, infrared thermography, thermal integrity profiling. So like this, we have some few different tests which are based on either reactive or infrared or thermal methods. Then there could be, especially when we are talking of durability of concrete, then penetrability is very important. Our IS 456 talks of the durability aspect of concrete. That is, the concrete, if the strength is higher, that does not mean that the concrete is durable. Strength is one of the parameters for getting a higher durability, but that is not the only parameter. For making a concrete durable, apart from strength, there are few other parameters, and the most important parameter is permeability of that concrete. Because if concrete is having a very high permeability, then it is going to allow air, water, or chemical fumes to have entry inside concrete. And once there is an entry of carbon dioxide, moisture, or chemical fumes, then they are going to attack your concrete and reinforcement. And once the reinforcement starts corroding, then the corrosion is going to have a very adverse effect on the entire integrity of structure. And then the durability of our structure is going to come down very drastically. And that's why the quality of cover concrete, that is the quality of concrete outside the reinforcement, that becomes very important. And many times people have in mind that the strain point of view, the core concrete, that is the concrete inside reinforcement, is more important. And even if the cover concrete, there are some issues, still it can be accepted. But that is not correct. Durability point of view, in fact, cover concrete is more important than your core concrete. And that's why the property of cover concrete we should be able to measure. And the main parameter which is going to allow this entry of all these air, humidity, or chemical fumes is the permeability. And that's why nowadays many of the codes and international practices, they have started modifying the requirements of concrete acceptance. And now the permeability of concrete is also introduced as a test, in situ test for acceptance of concrete for durability. So under that we have air or gas or water permeability test. Then apart from the above listed test, there are few tests which are not truly 100% non-destructive, but they are partially destructive tests. Under that we have penetration resistant test, which is a Windsor probe again, pull out test, pull off test, break off test, core cutting, So all the words you will see that somewhere we are taking out, we are breaking or cutting. So that's why these tests are called as partially destructive tests. And when we conduct these PDT or partially destructive tests, you should be very careful. First, we should see that because of this destruction, partial destruction, the overall integrity of that structure or safety of structure should not be endangered. So it's very important. So whenever you conduct this PDT, the quantity of PDT should be restricted. You can have more non-destructive tests and associated PD test, you can have some smaller quantity. Then apart from most of the tests, what we have seen, they are mainly related to concrete strength and corrosion. But the concrete can have other properties also, which may be important for specific structure wise. Suppose now if we take an example of concrete road. So in concrete road, compressive strength, yes, it is equally important, but flexure strength is also important as same as compressive strength. And there is one another parameter which is also important in especially concrete roads, that is abrasion. So abrasion resistance of concrete is very important in pavements and roads. So the situation to situation, the parameter or requirement of that concrete will differ. And that's why apart from the other ND tests, there are some few chemical tests wherein you can find out the cement content or the aggregate cement ratio. You can find out the what is the sulfate or chloride content in that hardened concrete. You can find out the pH or alkalinity of that concrete. You can find out up to what depth the concrete has carbonated. That means up to what depth the carbon dioxide has penetrated from surface. So for that, we have these different tests. Then maybe there could be some issue that you are interested in not knowing only the strength, but you want to know what is the depth of crack or what is the width of crack. Then there are crack measurement tools and monitoring tools. Then as I already said, that there are some tests wherein you can measure the abrasion resistance. And there are some instruments also which can be performed on a fresh concrete to give you the probable prediction of in situ water cement ratio and the probable strength of that particular concrete. Now, after seeing that what test can be conducted, which tests we should combine them. So this I have given a recommendation that at least you should combine two, preferably 3 or 4. So best combinations are rebound plus ultrasonic. Another combination is rebound plus hammer, rebound hammer plus UPV plus core test. So this is corrosion assessment. You can use half cell potential plus resistivity. The best combination is half cell potential plus resistivity plus carbonation plus sulfate and chloride test. So this is the best combination for assessing the corrosion extent of reinforcement. Then if you are going to test the pile, then for pile, you can have combination of pile integrity plus ultrasonic plus core. Then maybe you can combine even pile integrity with pile load test. Pile load test, either it can be a static load test or it can be a dynamic load test. Am I audible? Is there an issue?
No, you are audible. You are audible. No problem.
Okay. So when we are talking of pile integrity, maybe we can combine along with pile integrity, we can combine pile load test. And herein we can have either static pile load test or dynamic load test. Then sometimes depending upon the situation, you can combine GPR or radar with thermography, or maybe maturity test with pull-out test. So these are the probable recommended various combinations what you should have. And it is strongly recommended that you should never use any standalone one test. Combine minimum 2, preferably 3 or 4. Now I'll be showing you some of the tests. First is rebound hammer test, very commonly used in India. There are about 3 or 4 tests which are very commonly used in India. Out of that, first is rebound hammer. Rebound hammer test is very easy to perform. Then second, it's comparatively very cheaper. The instrument is also very small, handy, and manageable. And that's why there is a tendency that people go with rebound hammer test. But again, as I said earlier, never conduct a standalone rebound hammer test. Never, never conduct. Rebound hammer is a very, very preliminary test. If you compare it with the medical science, then this is just only a stethoscope. And we should not expect something big from this test. What you see in picture, here I have shown you different kinds of rebound hammers. So this is a rebound hammer which is placed in this, what you see over here. This is a calibration anvil. So this rebound hammer is placed in anvil for calibrating. Every instrument, every ND instrument, it requires a calibration. And again, the reliability or accuracy of your ND test results, it will largely depend on the calibration or reliability of that instrument particularly. So if you want to calibrate a rebound hammer, then you should have this calibration anvil, because this rebound hammer is based on a mechanical principle. It has a spring inside the hammer, and with the usage, the spring constant is going to change. And then after certain period of usage, we must calibrate this rebound on this calibration anvil. So these are different kinds of rebound hammer. This is a standard mechanical rebound hammer. This is a digital rebound hammer. This is also a digital rebound hammer. Then this is a rebound hammer wherein you have a paper roll. On that paper roll, you will get the readings. Then this particular rebound hammer, take a look at this, the tip. This is a pointed tip. So this rebound hammer is having a lower energy of impact. You cannot have same energy of impact for concrete and brick and mortars. For concrete and stone, we may have the higher energy rebound hammers. For brick, a slightly lower energy rebound hammer. And for mortar, again further lower energy hammer. So this particular tip hammer, this is for mortar. And whenever you purchase a rebound hammer, you will see that on the rebound hammer, there will be a graph pasted on this. This graph is rebound number versus compressive strength for different rebound positions. So this is a chart which will be pasted on that rebound hammer. This particular rebound hammer is a pendulum type rebound hammer. This is very commonly used for assessing the masonry, like concrete block masonry or stone masonry or brick masonry. Normally for stone masonry, this is not recommended. For stone masonry, you can use the standard concrete rebound hammer. But for brick and concrete block, you can use, or lightweight concrete block, you can use this pendulum type. Remember, whenever you see this sticker, never try to interpret this strength at site directly. That is from this correlating directly rebound number versus compressive strength. As I explained you earlier, there are n number of factors which influence this test, and we must have the correction factors for each and every correction. And then the laboratory should have a proper established correlation after applying the correction factor for that particular rebound number versus compressive strength. For different types of cement, you should have different curves. For different types of aggregate, you should have different curves. Then you must apply correction factors for moisture, angle, that is position of rebound hammer, and most important is carbonation, because they drastically or they affect this rebound number to a very large extent. This is a cross section of that particular rebound hammer. Normally, the hardness will be measured by this rebound hammer, and a surface of 20 to 50 mm will be only measured by rebound hammer. So remember, this is a only surface measurement tool. This is not going to assess the thickness of concrete of say 1 meter or 3 meter or 5 meter thick concrete. Let the member be of any thickness, it will assess only top 25 to 50 mm surface. And that's why this will have a very larger limitation. This test is influenced by smoothness, shape, size, age, surface and internal moisture condition, type of coarse aggregate, type of cement, type of mold, and most important, as I said, carbonation of concrete surface. Because due to carbonation, a calcium bicarbonate is formed, and calcium bicarbonate is a very hard substance. And that's why if the concrete is carbonated, and if you have not corrected this rebound number for carbonation factor, then you will make a very huge error. And that error can be almost as high as 50% error. That's why it is mandatory that along with rebound hammer test, carbonation test has to be performed. Do not perform rebound hammer test standalone without carbonation test. Because if you don't know what is the depth of carbonation, then your prediction or interpretation is going to be totally wrong. Now here I have shown two pictures. This is a foundation on which this rebound hammer test has been performed. And when I'm hitting a hard concrete, you will see that reading is somewhere between around 36. This is a rebound number. And in same foundation, there was a pocket of foundation bolt, and the wall thickness over here is only 25 mm. And still the reading is almost same. It's 35, 36. So this rebound hammer is not able to detect this large pocket. So that's why you can see that even the thickness of only 25 mm, still it is not able to identify what is inside, whether it's a hollow or not hollow. So this is to be used only as a surface strength, and we should not treat this strength as a strength of total entire concrete. Then another very important instrument is ultrasonic pulse velocity test. Ultrasonic pulse velocity test, actually this is a old code. The earlier code was 13311 part 1. Now the code has been revised. IS code, Indian code has been revised recently. And now the recent code, revised code is IS 516 section part 4, part 5 section 1. So it is IS 516 part 5 section 1 is now meant for ultrasonic. Section 2 will be for rebound hammer. And now under IS 516, all the NDT codes, now they will be covered under this particular test. So what you see over here, these are different types of ultrasonic testing machines. These are different kinds of probes. This is one probe, this is another probe. Over here you will see that they vary in size also, and actually they are varying not only in size, but they are varying in frequency also. So for concrete, you can use the ultrasonic probe having a frequency from somewhere around 20 kilohertz to around 200 kilohertz. This is how the ultrasonic is correlated with the strength of concrete. Every material will have a defined correlation with the velocity speed. ED stands for Young's dynamic modulus, rho is density, and V is Poisson's ratio. So over here you will see that rho density is in denominator. Keep it in mind, many times I have seen that people have a tendency to say that ultrasonic pulse velocity is dependent on density, but it is not directly proportionate, it is inversely proportionate. This is in denominator. So if the density is more, then velocity is going to come down. And people have some idea in mind that if concrete is more dense, then it will be more stronger. No, there is no correlation of density of concrete and strength of concrete. Strength has nothing to do with density. And it has been very proven worldwide that there is no correlation of strength versus density. But there is a correlation of velocity of concrete. Mainly, it is dependent on Young's dynamic modulus. Young's dynamic modulus is proportionate to static modulus, and static modulus is 5000 under root FCK. FCK is nothing but our compressive strength of concrete. So that's why velocity is proportionate to FCK. Ultrasonic tests you can perform in 3 different ways. First is direct transmission, where the probes are placed on opposite surfaces of concrete. This is called as a direct transmission. Then second is semi-direct, where the probes are placed on side by side, that is at right angle. And third one is indirect, where the probes are placed on the same side of concrete or same surface. This is the most reliable method, direct, because the pulse transmitted over here, that is the most strongest pulse. And that's why wherever possible, we must conduct only direct method. Then maybe suppose opposite faces are not accessible, then maybe you can use semi-direct. But as far as possible, avoid indirect measurement because this is not reliable tool. This is how the ultrasonic transmission will depend. Suppose there is no cavity or no fault, then the pulse will travel straightway from this transmitter to receiver. Suppose there is a cavity or some anomaly in between, then the pulse will get disturbed and it will require some more time to travel. So compared to this pulse will require more time. Suppose there is a crack, then in crack it will not travel, through air it will not travel, so it will try to travel a long way. So here also it will take more time. And in such case where the crack is sufficiently wide, there may not be any transmission. So simply from that crack it will reflect. Then gradation of quality of concrete. This is the code I was talking, IS 516 part 5 section 1. In 2018 this has been published, and in 2019 the gradation has been revised, and IS 516 gives gradation. First gradation is for grades of concrete less than M25, and second is for concrete greater than M25. So this is the gradation given by IS code, and this is only for direct velocity. IS code do not give any gradation for semi-direct method or indirect method. It gives only for direct method. We have been doing NDT for now more than 25 years, and we have generated our own quality gradation charts, and we differ or we do not agree with the IS 516, and that's why we have proposed, we have submitted even this table to IS code committee also. that there has to be a gradation at least for 4 different types of concrete. That is less than M15, because most of the structures which were constructed before 2000, these structures, they have strength of less than M15. And that's why we must have a separate gradation for M15, which are the old structures. Then M20, 25, 30, 35, and more than 40. If you ask me, ultrasonic pulse velocity, the reliability of ultrasonic pulse velocity will start dropping down with the grade. Normally, we recommend to conduct standalone ultrasonic test. If at all you want to conduct only one test, ultrasonic test, then UPV, I would recommend to conduct only up to M35 standalone test. Beyond M35, I would recommend to combine core and rebound test. And if it is more than M50, then I would strongly recommend to conduct core test. Without core test, for concrete grade more than M50, rebound ultrasonic test shall not be conducted standalone. Then this we are saying, as per our experience or our R&D, these V values we recommend for direct and semi-direct. And for indirect methods, maybe a value of 0.5 kilometer on lower side, you can have this table used. Ultrasonic is also influenced by type of cement, type of aggregate, surface condition, type of mix, reinforcement, stress level. So just like rebound hammer, even you should have all the correction factors for ultrasonic, and then only you should predict the strength of concrete. This is mainly used to assess the general integrity of concrete, homogeneity, quality of concrete, then presence of cracks, voids, other imperfections, changes of the structure which change with the time, and to assess the in situ compressive strength also. With the short time, I'm skipping some of the slides. This is how it is being used on a expressway. This is a Mumbai-Pune expressway, India's first expressway. Here we are conducted ultrasonic test very extensively, because this road was having issue of cracks. So here you will see that he is doing calibration. That person is doing calibration over here. Now you will see under red box, this is a crack. So first he is placing using a indirect method, and with indirect method, crack is kept at center. Then this probe is picked up and then it is placed over here where there is no crack in between, and then this becomes your reference value. So then we have rebar locators or reinforcement detectors. For rebar locators, there are two normally methods available. One is based on the pulse induction method and or electrical method, and second is based on the radar or GPR principle. So now under GPR principle, you will see this particular photos, what you see over here, these are based on the electrical methods. So various different types of instruments are available. This is an instrument wherein a probe is separate. These instruments, they have built-in probes. Then this is, you go on moving. So wherever there is no reinforcement, then it will show as green. When it comes over reinforcement, then it will show as say red mark over here. So this is how the instrument will give the indication of the reinforcement which is inside the concrete. Remember that this particular instrument, based on the electrical or these magnetic principles, they can detect the reinforcement up to a depth of about 75 to 100 mm. If the diameter of bar is sufficiently larger, say 35 mm or 40 mm, then maybe it can detect more than 100 mm, maybe say 125 mm. Some companies, they make a claim of depth detection of more than 150 mm, but our experience is that these claims are not true. some limitation again, that whether these instruments can give you the bar diameter. These particular instruments, they don't give you bar diameter, but this kind of instruments, here you will see that there is a diameter mentioned over here. So this company or these instruments, typically they make a claim that you can measure the bar diameter. But again, our experience, it shows that the limitation or error in measurement of bar diameter is very, very high. And that's why we strongly recommend not to use any of these bar diameter measurements tools for predicting the diameter of bar. Because even if you have a error of say plus minus 2 mm, that means suppose you get a reading of say 14 mm, and if you assume that the minimum error is say 2 mm, so that means the bar could be either 12 mm or it could be either 16 mm. And if it is the area of 12 mm bar is 113 and area of 16 mm bar is 201, so it's almost double. So even if you make a error of 2 mm, we are likely to make the error of 100% in prediction of area of bar. And that's why this is not recommended. Few companies are coming out with claims that they can measure the bar diameter. But again, our experience and whatever we have taken all the demos of this instrument, none of the international instrument is able to give you a correct diameter. And that's why we never predict the diameter. And I would recommend that you should not also depend on the diameter prediction. Now, the most important another test is core test. Now, core test is being covered under IS 516 part 4, and for interpretation, I-16 516 gives you interpretation, but in 456 also, section 2, there is also some interpretation, and 516 has given you option. Either you can interpret based on 516 or you can interpret based on 456. What are the requirements, main requirements? That the minimum diameter of core, it should be 3 times the nominal size of aggregate. In India, we use 20 mm size of aggregate. So that's why the minimum diameter should be 60 mm. Core length to diameter, that is H by D ratio, should be between 1 to 2. It's very important that specimen shall be soaked in water for at least 40 to 48 hours before testing. Minimum average equivalent cube strength should be greater than 85% of the design grade of concrete. That means, suppose you have say M20 grade of concrete and you have extracted the core. After extracting core, you will have to apply again some correction factors. First correction factor will be for diameter. Second correction factor will be for H by D, that is length to diameter ratio. Then third correction factor will be for shape, because what we are going to measure is the cylindrical strength, and our characteristic strength is not cylindrical, but it is cube. So we need to convert this cylindrical strength into a cube by multiplying it by 1.25. So after multiplying and correcting, so whatever average equivalent cube strength you get, it should be greater than 85%. So suppose if it is M20 concrete, then the equivalent cube strength of core sample should be more than 17. But in any case, it should not be less than 75. The accuracy of this instrument, even core test, which is supposed to be the most accurate method, still it will have plus minus 12%. And that's why you cannot expect in NDT any results of more reliability. Then this is used for determining the in situ strength. Sometimes small cores are used for chemical test. Then sometimes it is used for making core cuts for inserting water supply or pumping lines or electrical cables, or making pockets in foundations. But the main purpose, for structural purpose, it is determining the in situ compressive strength of concrete. Then ultrasonic tomography. This is a very interesting instrument which has been launched in market very recently, and this particular instrument at present it is not being used in India because mainly the cost is very high, and that's why it is not used in India. But this is a very interesting instrument, and as the cost starts dropping down, probably in fact this instrument will also become very popular in India. This is used mainly for detection of thicknesses, detection of voids, detection of poor quality bonds, detection of delaminations, detection of voids and honeycombing. Just a minute. Just hold for a second. Yeah, sorry for the disturbance. So this can be used for various different purposes. I'll show you how the instrument looks like. Presently, this has been marketed under the name of Mira. This has been developed by German Instruments. Normally for ultrasonic standard method, we have two probes. So one probe we placed on this side, one probe we placed on opposite side. But normally we are using two probes. But over here you will see that there are arrays of probes. So here you will see that this is 4 by almost 10. So 4 by 10, so you have 40 probes over here. How it works? So this is 4 by 6. So this is 24 probes. So this is again 4 by 10. So how this is going to work? Suppose we are using this 4 by 6. So first this probe will act as a transmitter. All rest 25 probes will act as a receiver. So this will transmit the pulse. Rest 23 will receive the pulse. Then after first has transmitted, then this will transmit, rest other will receive. Like that, every probe will go on transmitting and rest of will go on receiving. And then this instrument, so like this, one has transmitted and rest have received. And then this instrument is moved along the path. So at a time, below that there is no material, this is air or soil, so this will get reflected from here. Like that, first this is transmitting, this is, then second this is transmitting, rest of receiving. Suppose there is a crack over here, so from this it will reflect with a shorter time, and over here this will take a more time. So you go on scanning and collecting the informations in two directions, X and Y. It will go on picking the direction in depth direction, Z direction. Now suppose you have this concrete block with even a small hole of hardly say 13 mm dia hole. Even such a small hole can be detected with this instrument. Or if there are say honeycombs over here, then they can be detected. So this is a very tool which is being that way recently launched in market. This is called as a ultrasonic tomography. In this, we are using a indirect measurement tool, but we are not picking up only one signal, but we are picking a lakhs of signals at a time. Then carbonation of concrete is very important parameter that it is directly affecting your two issues. One is the durability of your concrete, and second is most important is corrosion. Normally, the concrete is having a pH of about 13. So it is a totally alkaline material. And once the carbonation or carbon dioxide starts penetrating inside the concrete, it will go on reducing the pH. And corrosion will have the best suitable pH of about 11. So if pH of concrete drops below 11, then that becomes a very favorable condition for corrosion. Remember, many times there is a confusion that there is a myth that if the concrete is carbonated, then it is bound to have a corrosion problem. No, it is not the case. Carbonation is going to give you a favorable condition. Carbonation on it's not going to trigger the corrosion. For triggering a corrosion, you require moisture and oxygen. If suppose moisture and oxygen is available, and if concrete is carbonated, then the corrosion will be higher. So corrosion, the carbonation is going to help corrosion, but it's not going to trigger the corrosion. For triggering a corrosion, you require moisture and oxygen. Carbonation rate is normally high in dry weather, but possibility of corrosion is less due to less moisture content. So I'll give you two examples. All coastal cities like Mumbai, Chennai, or Vizag, where there is a lot of humidity, so its weather is not dry. So in coastal area, there is a humidity. That's why the carbonation rate will be slow. But we see that in all the coastal area, the corrosion is very high. And that has nothing to do mainly with the carbonation, but the corrosion is high because of the high salinity, that is high moisture content, and the salts what you have in air. So these are the main two triggering factors. Chlorides what you have over there, they are the main triggering factors in coastal area. But all other cities like say Pune or say Satara or Sangli, Kolhapur, Nagpur, Hyderabad, which are inner cities, which are comparatively dry, here the carbonation will be very high. But as there is no moisture in air, that's why in these cities, there will not be any corrosion. So that's why we should be very careful when we try to understand a carbonation. Very simple test to identify carbonation. You have to simply spray a phenolphthalein indicator on a carbonated concrete. Wherever the concrete is carbonated, this portion which is carbonated, this will turn colorless. And the concrete which is uncarbonated, that will turn to pink. So this portion, you can say that this is the depth of carbonation, and this is the uncarbonated portion. If you look at this particular photo, take a very close look at this photo. Without spraying even phenolphthalein indicator, you will see that there is a change in color. As the concrete carbonates, the color becomes slightly lighter. And this is uncarbonated concrete. So this is a clear-cut ring over here. So this portion is a carbonated concrete, and this is a uncarbonated concrete. Now suppose your reinforcement is at this depth. Suppose the reinforcement is at this depth. So that means the entire cover concrete is already carbonated. Then will be a very large possibility that this bar will corrode. But suppose your reinforcement is at this depth, where the concrete is not carbonated, then carbonation will not have any effect on corrosion of that particular steel. This is how when the when the reinforcement, that is ferrous material, it reacts with oxygen, it will go on reacting with oxygen, and as it goes on reacting with oxygen, you will see that there is a volume increase in the reinforcement or bar. And this volume increase is as high as around 6 to 7 times the original size. And this 6 to 7 times volume increase is in volume, and that is not in diameter. So it's not going to happen that 12 mm diameter bar will have, say, 6 times the diameter. The overall volume, that is area increase, will be of about 5 to 6 times when it is at peak. And that's why the corrosion is very important, because once the bar corrodes, then because of the volume expansion, it will try to put a pressure on the cover concrete, and because of that expansion, that bar will try to push that cover concrete away from it. And because of this volume increase, there will be cracks in cover concrete. And if the volume increase of the tune of, say, 5 to 6 times, then there will be a spalling. That entire cover concrete will fall down, and then your bar will get exposed, and the corrosion will be very aggressive corrosion. Then for measurement of corrosion or mapping of corrosion, we have very one interesting instrument which is called as Hubsel potentiometer. Presently, this is not covered under Indian code, but probably the third section of 516 part 5 will be Hubsel potential test. that is under preparation, code is under preparation. But presently we are using ASTM C876. In this particular instrument, this is how it is comprised of. You will have a cylindrical acrylic tube wherein you have a copper sulfate solution. Inside you have a copper rod. So this is a electrode, this is a electrolyte. To complete any cell, you require 2 electrodes and 2 electrolytes, or maybe 2 electrodes or even 1 electrolyte, but you require basically 2 electrodes. So in this particular cell, what we have is only 1 electrode, and that's why this is only half part of cell. If you have only 1 electrode and 1 electrolyte, cell cannot be completed. There will not be any flow of current. To have a flow of current, there has to be some other media, and that's why in concrete acts as an electrolyte and reinforcement acts as an electrode. So now this is the half part of cell and this is the half part of other cell. And once now you have 2 electrodes and 2 electrolytes, now a current will flow and cell will get completed. So like this is a very handy instrument, what you see over here picture. So this blue color is a copper sulfate solution, and inside this is a copper rod. You have to place over concrete, and with the voltmeter, you have to measure the voltage across the reinforcement. This is a very simple instrument, very handy instrument. But main requirement is that at least at one location, we require to open the reinforcement because we need a electrical connectivity with that steel. And then just like how we do survey contours or survey of land survey for levels, we make a grid of say 5 meters or 10 meters center to center. Like that, you make a grid of in slab of say 0.5 meter, half a meter or 1 meter center to center, and then go on collecting the readings. Then ASTM gives you that how this is to be interpreted. Normally, if the value is more than minus 350 millivolts, then there will be a 90% possibility of corrosion activity. Then, just similar to how we draw the contours, we can draw the contours of half cell potentials. So here we can draw the contours of half cell potentials. So this particular zone, which is having more than minus 500, or this red zone, which is having more than minus 350, this indicates that in this region, there is a 90% probability that corrosion has already triggered. And the green portion, you can say that this is the safe portion where probability is almost zero. Then we have another instrument, which is a corrosion mapping that we have the resistivity meter over here. In resistivity meter, this is called as a 4-Venner probe technique. Again, this is a very handy instrument. Along the two inner probes, we measure the volts. Along the two outer probes, we measure the current. So we know that velocity resistivity is V by I. So depending upon the probe distance, you can calculate the resistivity of the concrete. Again, for resistivity, presently we don't have any code, but there are some international, even at international level also, there are no specific codes. But RILAM gives you some guidelines that if it is resistivity is greater than 100, then corrosion risk is very negligible. If it is 10 to 50, then it's moderate. If the value is less than 10, then the risk of corrosion is very high. Then similar to the potential contours, we can draw the resistivity contours. So again, over here, these two regions, that is pink and red. Over here, the risk of corrosion is very high. So like this, we can draw the contours over here. Just a minute. Yeah, okay. Then we have another instrument which is called as a impact echo. I'm trying to cover some of the main instruments which even you are likely to see in the field. And rest of the instruments I'll be now showing you in very brief, because already it's 1 hour 20 minutes already crossed. Maybe in next 10 minutes I will try to cover rest of the instruments in very brief, and after that we have some question and answer session. So this is the impact echo tester. In impact echo tester, what you see over here, these are the small ball bearings or steel balls which are hit on the concrete surface. And as you hit on concrete surface, because of that impact, some vibration or pulse will get generated and that will penetrate inside the concrete. This is that instrument, how it looks like, impact echo tester. So suppose you are hitting that small ball, so it will transmit a pulse inside concrete. Suppose there is a change in media. This is a slab, this is a soil. So from this surface, it will have a echo or it will reflect back. Even if there is a reinforcement, from reinforcement also it will have echo reflect back. From second layer also it will reflect back. If there are some anomalies in between, from that also it will reflect back. And then the signal is picked up. And just like tomography of ultrasonic, what we have, similarly, impact echo tomography also can be done. And with this, you can very precisely find out what are the uh, flaws or problem issues in that particular concrete. Another very important instrument is pile integrity testing. For this, we have a code 14893, and there is American code also D5882. This is also based on the pulse echo. So very similar to impact echo. This is also based on similar principle. So over here you have this accelerometer. Now you are going to hit the pile top surface with a small rubber or nylon hammer, and this will generate a pulse inside the concrete, and this accelerometer will pick up the signal, and signal could be like this. So this is a very similar to ECG of your concrete. This is how the pile integrity it works. Suppose you are hitting on a top of pile, it will travel, the pulse will travel right up to bottom where there is change in media, because this is concrete, below that there is a soil. So from this it will get reflected back, and you will see a signal like this. Suppose there is some niche in the pile, or there is some necking in the pile. So one pulse will get reflected from this necking. So you will get a reflection from over here. This will look like this in picture. Then the part of that pulse, still it will travel at bottom, and from bottom also it will reflect back. And once it reflects back, again you will get a second signature over here. Suppose there is a bulging, reverse of this. So again at bulge, it will reflect back, and at bottom it will reflect back. So this is how the reflectogram of that pile will look like. This is a typical reflectogram of a good pile. This is a reflectogram of a defective pile, where you see that there are a lot of anomalies or a lot of issues in between. Comparatively here, the pile is very clean. These are some of the pictures. What really happens when we cast the piles, because we are pouring from top, we are not able to have any quality control during pouring. Suppose if soil is getting displaced and it is falling inside the pile concrete, we are not able to identify from the top. But the pile integrity test, if you perform, that will give you that where is the exact fault. So these are some of the piles which have very serious faults. Look at these particular piles. Almost over here, the entire concrete is missing. Here concrete is missing. This concrete is missing. This concrete is totally missing. So in this particular portion, this soil has fallen down inside the concrete. So this can be very well detected with the pile integrity test. This is pile cross-hole sonic logging test. I'm not covering again in this all these tests in detail. Now, very interesting instrument is GPR, that is ground penetrating radar. In ground penetrating radar, instead of normal, say, pulse, here we use a electromagnetic pulse. So electromagnetic pulse is transmitted by antenna. So it will transmit in ground. Suppose there is some buried object. So it will have some different reflection over here. So part of energy will get reflected back. Part of energy still it will travel. And suppose there is a change in media in soil. So from this point also it will come back. So from each and every point material, it will reflect, it will pass through that material, and then it will come back. So instead of a stress wave, here we are transmitting an electromagnetic wave. This is very popular ground penetrating radar, mainly for locating the pipes, cables below ground, buried objects or foundations, locate steel in concrete, find internal defects, voids, delamination, cracks. Uh, am I getting some disturbance? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You are audible, sir. You are audible.
Yeah.
Audible.
Okay. Thank you. So it is used for locating zones of water penetration, corrosion, determination of thicknesses of members, find the integrity of concrete or masonry walls, mapping of subsurface soil or rock layering, or locating even buried archaeological structures. So this is very powerful and very good instrument. But the interpretation of GPR is very complex and it requires a knowledge of geophysics and it requires a lot of experience. So the radargram will look like something like this. It's a very complex. You can have different kinds of cards that maybe you can use a 4-wheel card. Normally over here, the front part will be your transmitter and back part will be your receiver. So simply you have to go on moving that card. Maybe this card you can attach to your car and go on moving this card. Or maybe you can use with simple hand and go on scanning in X and Y direction. And using this, in this particular case, they are trying to identify the locations of post tension PT cables and reinforcement. GPR can be used even to assess the thickness. Suppose this is a ground level plinth and you want to know what is the depth of concrete via exactly laid. Then simply you move this GPR over slab, then the bottom line will be clearly indicated in this radargram. Again, very popular tool for identifying pipes and cables. Very popular tool. Simply you move on the road surfaces or entire ground in both XY grid and you can identify various pipes, maybe gas pipe or a plastic pipe or a cable over here. So this is very interesting instrument. Then comes is a infrared thermography. What is infrared thermography? Everything on planet will contain some thermal energy and which has got a very specific temperature. And this thermal energy is emitted from the surface. And this energy is called as a infrared radiation. So normally what we have the standard cameras, all our standard cameras, they have a filter for infrared. Now suppose you take it out that filter, then this camera will convert into an infrared. But we want infrared thermal camera. So it's not that simple that simply you take out the filter from our camera and then it will become an infrared camera. So if this is an electromagnetic spectrum, what we see over here, this is the only small spectrum what is visible. Beyond this, on left-hand side, ultrasonic, X-ray, gamma ray, this is not visible. Just adjoining on the right-hand side, here we have infrared thermal radiation. And this is picked up by this camera. And beyond this, we have microwaves, radio waves, that is AFM, AM, and then we have the electrical power energy over here. So these are typical pictures. What you have seen, this was very commonly used. And even today in COVID also, now everywhere we are using the infrared thermal guns for measuring the temperature of human body. But these are only guns. They are measuring only a location pointed out at our forehead. They are measuring the temperature only at that one particular spot. But suppose you have an infrared thermal camera instead of a gun, then this is how a picture will look like. The hot spot is which is brighter, and the cold spot which is darker. So this is a very simple principle. How this can be used in construction practices? Thermal heat loss inspection of buildings. It can be used for measuring the thermal heat loss. Then you can identify the moisture or leakages. You can have the concrete integrity inspection, locating missing or damaged insulations, or some air leakages, especially in your AC rooms. Evaluate the thermal performance of retrofits. This is being very commonly used for assessing the performance of fiber wrapping material what we use. Suppose the fiber wrapping is properly done, then the temperature of that entire surface will be almost same. But suppose at one particular location it is not properly stuck and there is a gap in between. So if you measure a temperature, so if there is a air gap in between, there will be a reduction in temperature. And if you take a thermal image, then easily you can find out that there is a cavity or void below that. Then, and that's how you can detect the delaminations in concrete slabs and bridges. These are some of the typical photographs. The darker indicates a lower temperature. So this is a photograph taken by thermal camera. This is a room. This is a corner of that room. By naked eye, you're not able to identify that there is a problem over here. But with thermal camera, you can identify that the lower temperature is indicating that probably there is some seepage or leakages. Similarly, over here also, you will notice that if you take a photograph of that entire structure from outside, you will see that the lower, these are the higher temperatures, brighter, and these spots, they are having low temperatures. That means they indicate that probably there could be some heat loss, maybe because of say seepage or leakages from these particular window sills. Now suppose you take a picture of this your room. Simply looking with a normal camera picture, you won't identify anything. But if you take a thermal image, this is the AC duct, so that's why there is a temperature drop. But in visible picture, nowhere you can identify that there is a leakage, but the thermal camera is identifying that there is a leakage of air. You go over there, seal this spot particular, and now take a picture. Now you'll see that this is the only air vent from where the air is coming out. So now rest of everything is properly sealed. Simply taking a picture of water tank from outside, you can know what is the water level. Because of the water, the temperature is going to be on lower side of concrete, and upper concrete, concrete which is heated up will have a different temperature. Then these are different crack scopes for measuring the width of crack. Even you can use the simple cards wherein you printed the standard thicknesses. This is also a very simple tool. Or you can use these crack scopes. Only my computer screen is visible, or even I am also visible to you?
Sir, you are also visible at corner, right side corner.
Okay, okay. So this is a typical, can you see this?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So this
Yes,
is a
sir.
typical strip, what can be used at site. What I was showing this. So you can use a very handy cards also, wherein you can measure the width of the crack. These are the crack measurement scopes, crack scopes. Then you can use various endoscopes also, especially where the areas are inaccessible, mainly false ceiling or say manholes where you cannot access, or maybe tubes or pipes. So here endoscopes can be used. Or maybe even if you have some doubt that inside the wall there is some cavity or there is some false floor or false ceiling, then you can use the endoscopic cameras. Similarly, you can use even underwater cameras also for inspection of jetties and underwater structures, piers. This is very handy an instrument. You can sit in a boat and lower this camera. This can rotate in 360-degree, and you can take a video and picture of that entire all the structures. Then you can measure the vibrations in the structures. Vibrations could be of so many reasons, and the vibrations can create a lot of issues in structures. So you need to take the measurements of that vibration. Normally, the velocity, acceleration, and displacement, these three parameters are measured. Then for load-bearing structures, this is the only test which is called as a flat jack test. With this flat jack test, you can assess that what is the in situ strength of that particular masonry, compressive strength, or what is the present stress level in that masonry. You can have the X-ray units also, very similar to what we use X-ray for human body. You can take a X-ray of column and beams. Here the tendons are visible. But remember that because of the radiation hazard, these X-ray machines or gamma ray machines, they are very rarely used in the fields because they are not that safe as we have the instruments for human, normal human X-rays. If you have to take a X-ray, then you are required to vacate a very sizable area around the structure, maybe around say 300 meters to half a kilometer area. On all the sides, you will have to vacate. So that makes it very difficult to use because of the radiation hazard. Then another important test, as I told you, that this is air permeability test. Then this is water permeability. Then this is gas permeability. You can inject water, air, or gas with a pressure. And depending upon the permeability or denseness of that concrete, there will be a pressure loss. And then you can identify what is the permeability of that particular concrete. Recently, maturity meter or maturity test is also now being used in the field. Actually, in maturity meter, we are going to measure the temperature of that concrete. So this is very important that this method can be used only for a new structures, because in new structure, this requires a pre-planning. Before casting of concrete, you're supposed to insert those maturity meters at specific locations in the concrete, then cast the concrete, and then immediately after starting of casting of concrete, then you will start knowing the temperature of that concrete. And with the age, that temperature will go on moving and changing. And every concrete normally will have a specific temperature timeline. And normally it has got approximately the same strength, whatever combination of temperature and time go to make up to that particular maturity level. So if you have some specific maturity level, then you can find out what is the probable strength of that concrete. But remember, this cannot be used on old structures. This cannot be used on old structure. This has to be used on a new structure, and this requires pre-planning. Very important, this requires a lot of calibration and a lot of interpretation. Apparently, it looks to be a very simple test, but it's not that simple. This is how that typically a maturity meter will look like. It will be actually inserted in a steel tube. You have to insert, and immediately after casting of concrete, you have to break that glass tube, and then it will start measuring the temperature on this particular scale. Now coming to last 1 or 2 slides. that how many number of tests we should conduct at a location. Recommended values, minimum cores, you should have 3, preferably 8. Rebound number at a one location, we should conduct minimum IS code says 6, but we recommend 9 to 12. Ultrasonic pulse velocity in a one particular location, minimum you should have is at least 2 points in one member, preferably 3 or 4. Same way, Windsor probe around 3, pull out 4, pull off 6, break off 5, and so on. Now, last 2 or 3 slides wherein I'll show you some of the case studies. These are the case studies where you have a very, very severe corrosion of reinforcement. Take a very closer look over here. You will notice that beam bottom cover and slab bottom cover has totally fallen down. It has totally spoiled. But here you can see some of the reinforcement. Here you can see the bar over here. But what you see over here, these are not the bars. The bars were present. Now these are the traces of the corrosion. This is the scale which has stuck to that concrete. The bar has totally vanished out. See, this is another picture. How corrosion can trigger issues. The cover concrete has totally fallen down. And take a closer look over here. The staircase slab has fallen down. It has totally broken because of the simply severe corrosion. See how corrosion can make severe cracks in columns. You can pass a finger through and through. Even in MS plate tanks also, this is a very thick tank, almost of about 40 mm thick plate. But down the line, within 6-7 years, totally it has gone. Huge scaling. This is a pipe supporting structure. This was supposed to be a ISMC channel. It's totally gone. These are the issues in the structures, especially all RCC structures. But you see over here, this is one of the bridge on National Highway in India. This is how a picture it should not be. You can see that almost entire deck slab is full of crack. All the cracks in say 1/3 end region, they are shear cracks. So over here, these are shear cracks, and in the central portion, these are flexural cracks. So you will see that near support, they are almost 45, and as you go near center, they are becoming totally vertical. This is a slab seen from bottom. So even the bottom deck is having totally cracked. What you see over here, all the cracks are now sealed and epoxy is being injected. So these are the nozzles for injecting epoxy. This is another national highway bridge where the end diaphragm is being checked with ultrasonic. From here, we are extracting a core. From top, you will see this is a box girder. So the top slab is totally cracked. Then these are typical water tanks that what we have all for municipal corporations or Nagar Parishad corporation tank. We have tested some of the tanks near to your college, and there also we have found the situation was very serious. In one of the town near to your college, we are checked. This is not the photo of that particular tank. This is a photo of different tank. But you can see the dome slab has totally collapsed. There is no cover concrete. The reinforcement is totally corroded down, mainly because of the entrapped chlorine gas, zero cover, and poor quality concrete. These are the typical water tanks, what we have, ground level reservoirs. Again, over here, you will see that reinforcement. This is a bar you will see, and over here, the bar has vanished. Over here also, you will see that there is no bar. The bar has vanished. So corrosion can have a very serious issue. So with this, we come to conclusion of this our session on non-destructive testing. If you have any questions, maybe in next